All right, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. This is the E-Hunter podcast. I'm your host, Taryn Hunt. On today's podcast, I've got a pretty controversial topic that we're going to be discussing, and I have a very special guest. Her name is Keely Hopkins. She's the Pacific States Assistant Manager with the Congressional Sportsmen's Association. Keely was nice enough to join me and talk about the possible ban on hunting in Oregon. We posted the article about this a couple of weeks ago, and it got quite a bit of attention, and a lot of people had questions. And so I reached out to Keely, and she was nice enough to jump on a call with me and share some insights kind of about the background and what this truly looks like for this possible ban on hunting in Oregon. They need help. They need a lot of help in fighting this, and so she shares a lot of that information and how we can do that as sportsmen and hunters. Before we jump into the podcast, guys, as always, we want to thank Vortex Optics. Vortex is amazing. I think I mentioned this on a previous podcast, but we spend a lot of time behind glass right now, whether it be behind a rifle scope, whether it be behind binoculars, spotting scopes. Vortex has everything that you need, and the quality that you're going to get with Vortex Optics is pretty amazing. So make sure and check them out. It's vortexoptics.com for their website. You can check them out pretty much anywhere. Bass Pro, Cabela's, Sportsman's Warehouse, really just about anywhere you can find optics. You'll be able to find Vortex Optics. So appreciate them and their support for us here at eHunter. So without further ado, let's jump into this podcast with Keely. Well, to kick us off, if you wouldn't mind, would you mind giving us a quick introduction, letting everybody know who you are, what you do, where you work, all that kind of fun stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So Keely Hopkins, I am the Pacific States Assistant Manager with the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation. I am based in Portland, as I just mentioned. I cover a 6-state region on behalf of Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation. I cover Alaska, Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, and Hawaii. And I'm newer to the organization. I've been here since March, have a background in government relations, and am a licensed attorney. But really my passion is working on hunting and fishing policy, so CSF has been the absolute perfect place for me to be.
Oh man, that would be a wonderful place to be for all of that. Do you get to go to Hawaii very often?
It's to be determined. I haven't yet. That's the only state, though, that isn't represented by a state legislative sportsman's caucus. So that's my goal, is to get that last state started with one.
Oh, heck yeah. That would be awesome. I don't think travel's been so restricted lately, but hey, that would be cool.
Absolutely. I wouldn't mind it.
I've always wanted to go to Hawaii. Man, we're already jumping down a rabbit hole, but I've always wanted to go to Hawaii and hunt axis deer. So that's like one on my bucket list to do before I kick the bucket.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, I appreciate the introduction. I appreciate you being on the podcast, like I mentioned. Because like I said, I know this isn't probably a normal thing for you, but I do appreciate you kind of helping us out with what's going on in Oregon right now. Because like you said, there's a lot of stuff a lot of interesting stuff going on in Oregon. But when they came out and said, they're introducing legislation that could possibly, and it's not even just make hunting illegal. There's so many different aspects of this. Like apparently you couldn't even raise cattle in Oregon and whatnot. Maybe I'll just turn it over to you. Can you kind of tell me the details about this ballot initiative that was submitted?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So it does kind of cover everything that you could think of. It doesn't just ban hunting, fishing, trapping, but it would also prevent ranching. It would prevent a lot of research that's being done, a lot of good animal husbandry and breeding practices that we currently have in place. What it would do is it would make it a crime to kill any animal. So in effect, that would obviously entail hunting, fishing, but it would also make it a crime if you were to touch an animal in a certain manner. That would be considered a felony in some instances. So it would restrict a lot of education. It's very far-reaching, so it's hard to even go into what all it would cover.
Well, that is so interesting because my mind automatically goes to like the management of these animals, and I guess I don't know what the plan would be because, if you can't hunt them, you can't touch them, hurt them in any way. I mean, the numbers would just go, off the board, I would think. Would you agree? I mean, would managing these animals be really tough?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, they're the ones that are entrusted to manage our wildlife populations. They do so using a sound wildlife plan, a wildlife management plan based on the unit, based on the carrying capacity for each unit, to manage it so that it's a balanced ecosystem and that all the different species can thrive. And without having the tools of hunting, it's going to be, they're going to have that tool removed from them. But then also, when you take away the revenue that's generated from hunting and fishing license sales, that's going to cut their budget by over half. So that's money that won't be available for conservation efforts, endangered species protection, a whole range of things.
I'll bet that's something that not a lot of people think of when they introduce legislation or ballot initiatives, I guess is what this was called, is the financial piece of it. Because, I've done podcasts, so many podcasts with wildlife biologists, and, we talk about this. We talk about, they manage the numbers, because if you let the numbers increase, or if you just make them unmanageable, then you see a population of one thing grow and a population of another kind of go away. And like you said, not extinct, but animals that are kind of on that list that are, that
endangered or threatened.
Yeah, that is the word, endangered. For those kind of animals, you could see them just completely disappear. And then on the other side of that, like you mentioned, is a lot of the wildlife biologists talk about, well, hunting is what really brings in the money to do all this conservation, and if you don't have those funds, then there's a lot of this conservation that can't happen, and then the end result actually is the animals actually get hurt even worse. They start dying of different diseases and malnutrition and things like that. So, boy.
Right, absolutely. So if you do care about animals, then you need to, support the management of them and the conservation efforts. They need to have a habitat where they can thrive, and they need to have balanced ecosystems. And so I feel like that was kind of a short-sighted, effect when the proponents of this maybe didn't quite think it through, or maybe they're okay with those effects. I'm not sure.
So who was it that actually introduced this? Do you know?
So it's a grassroots movement at this point. It was introduced by one gentleman that just recently moved to Oregon from Colorado. There was a similar effort launched in Colorado, but because it violated the single subject rule in Colorado, it has been removed, so it's no longer going to appear on the 2022 ballot. But the one in Oregon is still moving forward. It's just one individual. He started a website. He's getting volunteers to help him with his campaign. But at this point, it doesn't seem to be associated with any larger organization that we might be familiar with. Okay. But it's still in the early stages, so we'll see how it evolves.
I think I heard that it was just introduced like in June or first part of July, if I remember right.
Well, there's a process that goes along with qualifying for the ballot. So his first step was he had to gather 1,000 signatures to request the ballot title language. And then there's a process that you go through in order to get the ballot title language. In early July is when they finished that process, and he was approved to start circulating the petitions in order to gather the signatures to qualify it for the ballot.
Gotcha. Okay. Wow, that's kind of amazing. So, what do what do we as hunters, what can we do to help kind of combat this a little bit?
Well, I think it's important not only just for hunters in Oregon, but for hunters all over to be involved in this, because the proponent has already said if we're successful here, we're going to be moving state to state. So he mentioned specifically Washington, California, Colorado, really any state that has a ballot initiative process. So I think the best thing we can all do is join together to make sure if this qualifies for the ballot that it's soundly defeated, so that an attempt isn't made elsewhere. So right now, when they're in the signature gathering stage, it's really important that we get the message out. Decline to sign. Do not have your local stores promoting this. Don't let them gather signatures there. Just really, we want to do everything we can to prevent it from appearing on the ballot. Then if it does qualify for the ballot, we need to do our part to educate all the voters about not only what this would do for the sportsman's community, but if you care about conservation and wildlife management, then you also need to vote no on this.
Okay. Gotcha. And I would imagine organizations like yourselves are probably taking the lead on this to help combat it, and I'm sure there's items that you guys are doing outside of those things as well. Is that correct?
It is, yeah, absolutely. So we're working with a coalition of sportsmen's groups that have all came out opposed to this initiative. So we have a large coalition of hunters, fishers, conservationists, all working together in opposition. It's both with national partners, but also in-state partners. The Oregon Hunters Association has really stepped forward and taken a leadership role in coordinating the effort. And we're still in the early stages. We have a steering committee, and we're continuing to develop that campaign in opposition.
Gotcha. Okay. I didn't even realize there was an Oregon Hunters Association. That's really good to know. And for those listening, I mean, make sure that you're reaching out to these organizations like them, supporting them, because honestly, they're going to be the front runners helping combat these kind of things going forward. Keely, if you wouldn't mind, one thing I found as I was talking to some of our staff about doing this podcast with you, and a lot of them weren't really familiar with the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation and what you all do outside of this. Would you mind taking a few minutes and kind of just talking about, like, I mean, you talked about all the different states that you work with, but what other things do you guys work on?
Well, a lot of the work we do is focused on policy. We're the leading voice in our nation's capital and in the halls of capitals across the country at the state level. We work in a variety of manners to represent hunters and fishers, trappers, recreational shooters. We have several different caucuses that we work with and help support. So we have the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus, which is comprised of over 250 members of Congress that we work with kind of in unity to support conservation and wildlife management efforts at the federal level. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have a state caucus in every single state that's made up of legislators from both sides of the aisle that we work with to enact policy at the state level in order to protect and advance hunting and fishing with states. We also have a governor's sportsman's caucus, which is comprised of a lot of governors from across the country that we work with to do things like a National Hunting and Fishing Day proclamation, work with them in their agencies, also to do everything we can to protect the sportsmen.
Wow, okay. So I didn't even realize. So let me make sure I'm hearing you correctly. So the members of this foundation are actually Congress members or people that are already in government positions. Is that correct?
No, so we work with them.
Oh, you work with them.
Our
okay.
organization, yes. So we're the organization that helps support them and the work that they're doing. So we kind of provide that leadership and that, guidance and help them to do the work they're doing.
Okay. I mean, that makes sense because, so in my real job, I'm a nurse. Don't make fun of me for that. But I run a home health and hospice company, and so I've had the opportunity to go to Capitol Hill and be in the halls of Congress and meet with them and pushing different legislation as it relates to healthcare. So it sounds like you guys do kind of similar things in that you're there working with them, but also kind of taking the lead in making sure that our rights are followed and we're able to do the things that we want to do.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and we also work with a lot of other organizations, to provide, so we're all working in the same direction, under the same banner, moving forward. So we work with a lot of partners, both at the national level and then within each of the states too.
Gotcha. How do people support you? Do you guys do like donations, funding type of a thing? Do you guys have different events? How do people help support your guys' foundation, the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation?
We do, yeah. There's a lot of ways. So we're a 501c3, so donations to us are typically tax exempt. We do a variety of fundraising efforts. I believe you can donate on our website at congressionalsportsmen.org. But we also do banquets. A lot of the states we're in will work with the state legislative caucuses to host events. Like in California, we're doing a trap shoot. All of the fundraising and sponsorship that we generate from that will go to support the California Sportsmen's Caucus. In Washington, we're hosting a fishing trip up there this weekend to go out salmon fishing. So organizations and individuals that want to support the work of the Washington State Sportsmen's Caucus can become a sponsor of that. But then also just supporting Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation in general helps support the staff to be out there in the field working with all of the caucuses.
Yeah, definitely. Very cool. And I strongly encourage everybody that's listening, make sure and support foundations like the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation. I mean, I've said this already a couple times on this podcast, but they're the ones that are out there doing the work for us. They're the voices that are heard, and that this is what they do. So for us that have other day jobs and don't have the time or the resources or ability to do these things, you got to be supporting the people that can. And then when it comes to things like this, like I said, when we first posted that article about this proposed ballot initiative, and everybody starts freaking out and wondering what we can do. And I really think it comes down to that, just really supporting the people that have the voice, that have the ability to make a difference. I'm on this. Keely, going back to that proposed ballot initiative, is there anything that I missed on that? Did we touch on everything? Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about as it relates to that?
Not necessarily. Like I said, it's so wide-reaching that it really covers the full aspect of things that you wouldn't even think of until you're kind of picturing different scenarios, like pest control. You wouldn't be allowed to do any of that here in Oregon. You couldn't have rodeos. You probably couldn't have a lot of horse riding events. You couldn't have any of the breeding practices that we normally see. So it is just very far-reaching. But I'd encourage everyone to take a look through it. Also check out the campaign in support of it to get a sense of where they're coming from and just exactly how extreme and egregious their thoughts are when it comes to animals.
I didn't realize, so that you can't even, and actually it is up on our, I didn't write the article, but it is up on our website that, rodeos and similar exhibitions, that you couldn't even have that. Is that because it may hurt a horse or something?
Mm-hmm. Right. Anything that could injure an animal. Or some offensive touching, as they describe it.
Man, we have chickens. I wonder if that would be illegal. I wonder if you could have chickens to lay eggs.
Yeah, you'd want to be careful with it.
Oh my goodness, boy, that's kind of scary on how limiting that is. We do have a list up on our website of some of the things that are on this, but you also, you can look at the proposed initiative and find all the specific details on that. But man, that's scary, and what this could possibly look like. We're so narrow-minded in the hunting. I shouldn't say we're narrow-minded. All these hunters are probably yelling at me right now, but we get so focused on hunting and fishing, and it's our passion, it's what we love to do, and so our minds really think, okay, well, if you're going to take hunting away from us, that's a red button item for us. But when you look at all the other things that this thing could possibly do, my goodness, it could be interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
So, well, cool, Keely. Well, thank you so much for jumping on. I didn't expect this to be a super long podcast. I really just kind of want to get your thoughts on it, make sure that us as hunters really knew what we were up against here, and how, and I guess most importantly, is how we could help. And so, again, strongly encourage everybody to support the foundations that are combating this, because obviously this goes against what we love to do and what we want to be doing, and then also just stay informed of what's going on. As Keely mentioned, this was actually, they attempted to do this in Colorado, and it ended up being against the Colorado's constitution, so it wasn't able to do it. But things change in a hurry, so you guys got to be on top of your game and make sure you know what's going on out there. So again, Keely, appreciate you you taking the time to join this call with me. Actually, I'm hoping this isn't the last podcast that you and I do together. You might be a resource for me going forward, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be happy to, and happy to provide updates as we work our way through this process with the initiative.
Let's do that. In fact, maybe I'll reach out to you in a month or so and just see if there's any changes. And if there are, maybe you and I can hop on another call and do another podcast.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to.
Cool. All right. Well, I will let you back to it. Thank you so much.